Welcome to Tardisian Files.
Hello listeners! In today's episode we're going to be reviewing the latest instalment to the extended Whoniverse, The War Between the Land and Sea. If you have not yet watched this spin-off series, be warned as there will be spoilers ahead. Starting off with a heavily summarised recap of the series, a unit transport worker, Barclay Pierre Dupont, finds himself as unit's designated civilian observer when humanity once again comes into contact with the Sea Devils. Just as the United Nations did during the 456's return to Earth in 2009, Thames House is once again converted into an embassy, this time for the Sea Devils, now calling themselves Homo Aqua, to stage negotiation talks between themselves and humanity, to determine how the two peoples will share the Earth. The main bone of contention in these negotiations is humanity's centuries worth of pollution that has been deposited into the oceans, scarring the nomadic Homo Aqua's habitat with disease, waste products, and toxins. The Homo Aqua ambassador, a female named Salt, demands that all communications between humanity and Homo Aqua are made through herself and through Barclay. This puts Barclay on the spot as he struggles under the pressure of navigating global diplomacy, coming at odds with owning up to some uncomfortable truths about human society's flaws. Meanwhile, conspiring against them and UNIT, the PM of the UK and conspirators from the militaries of France and America, as well as one of his loyal funders, work to force the negotiations in favour of humanity through a programme known only as Severance. Eventually, after going rogue, both Salt and Barclay try to placate their respective sides. Meanwhile, Kate Stewart resorts to ethically questionable tactics to push back against those within government conspiring against UNIT. After a series of humiliating and, quite frankly, terrifying displays of power by Homo Aqua, including the raining down of all the pollution and waste from the oceans onto the land, the series ends on a sombre note when we find out what Severance is. A man-made virus deployed into the oceans, engineered to specifically kill 90% of Homo Aqua, an attack that horrifies even the public who had previously been terrorised by the ancient species' might. Homo Aqua concedes and agrees to a humiliating treaty that relegates their people to a reservation in the ocean to live separately from humanity. Despite this, the emotional bond between Salt and Barclay leads to a joyful reunion between the pair, and the series ends with Barclay growing his own set of gills and swimming off into the ocean with his aquatic lover. Starting off with the pros, I have to applaud Russell T Davies, at least for the premise of this series. Personally, I think his writing shines best when he's writing political dramas within a science fiction world, as he has a way of bringing together the two elements in a way that synergistically enhances both, and it's not an easy thing to do to get that balance right, but he does it incredibly well. And I will also say that my favourite moment in this series was when Homo Aqua dumped all of humanity's waste onto the land. If this wasn't a very obvious statement to point out the hypocrisy, then I don't know what is. The message was very clear. If all the waste in the ocean was suddenly on land, we as a species would be far more proactive about dealing with it. Instead, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. Case, point, message received. I also want to take a moment to appreciate the diversity of the Homo Aqua species. The biologist in me absolutely loves the fact that the Sea Devils are further characterised into a tangible genus with a different species of Homo Aqua, Homo Amphibia, and the anthropomorphic fish species that were seen in the underwater delegation. And as Russell even said in an interview, even though this series isn't a sequel to Children of Earth, the story does follow on from the events of this last encounter between humanity and another species where the Doctor wasn't present. We see the UN returning to Thames House, we see UNIT taking charge of the negotiations, at first, and we see that UNIT appears to have learned somewhat since the 456 encounter, developing protocols such as the Civilian Observer, which is what allows Barclay to actually be part of this story. I will also say that it was very satisfying to see that the fictional PM Harry Shaw, Sir Keith Spears, Oscar Gunsberg, and Dominique Dusselier, the masterminds behind Severance, and in Sir Keith's case, the funding of Las Clement, all got what they deserved at the end of the series, meeting a fitting end for each of them either at the hands of Homo Aqua or the very people he plotted with in Sir Keith's case. Even though Homo Aqua decidedly lost this power struggle, it served as a reminder that those who sabotaged these negotiations did not go unpunished. Finally, I will say that the overall political themes about pollution, but also the effects that harsh agendas pushed by powerful people have on the world, was really brought to light very well in this series. In this particular case, we saw that the problems created by a minority group of humans, leading to the world having to deal with the fallout when Homo Aqua decided to clap back. And then on the flip side, we saw how Homo Aqua's entire way of life, being nomads and rulers of the sea, was reduced to an admittedly very humiliating plot of ocean, which is clearly a reference to the reservations enforced by American settlers upon the Native Americans by the end of the 19th century. The use of current political themes and historical inspirations helps to lament a very harrowing truth about humanity. We are not very good at learning our lesson. Moving on to the cons, I will admit that while I was very excited for the war between the land and sea to hit our screens, I will say there was a part of me that was maybe a little bit disappointed by the end product. Most notably, the worst con of this series has to be the death of Christopher Ibrahim, Kate Stewart's love interest and actually one of the heroes of UNIT who's appeared several times over the 15th Doctor's run and helping him defeat the Rani at the end of the Reality War. This, I think, was an incredibly unnecessary character sacrifice of a much beloved character, and it invokes similar feelings of futility that were stirred up by the death of Yanto Jones in The Children of Earth. Both losses are just as shocking as they were heart-wrenching, and they may have both pushed Jack Harkness and Kate Stewart to do something morally ambiguous to get things to a resolution, but the problem with that is that in this series, Kate's quest for vengeance doesn't actually achieve anything, because she doesn't figure out what Severance is before it's already been deployed. She then intimidates a psychiatrist to break her oath and threatening to expose her extramarital affairs, and ultimately the negotiations between humanity and Homo Aqua nearly spill into complete chaos, with Homo Aqua bringing humanity to its knees. At least Yanto's death led Captain Jack to save the day. Kate, on the other hand, honestly just lost a lot of respect from me. And the cherry on top of this uncharacteristically dark turn made by Kate is actually made worse by the final scene where we see her threatening a civilian with a gun for littering instead of maybe just picking up the plastic for herself. It may not have been very poignant in terms of holding people to account for their actions, but it certainly would have been a lot more of a wholesome moment if Kate did something to acknowledge her collective responsibility and demonstrate that her heart's in the right place, because right now she's kind of bordering on anti-hero about to go full supervillain, and that honestly doesn't sit right with me. Another bugbear of mine is the same bugbear that I had with Lucky Day and The Legend of Ruby Sunday, with the characters of Harriet Arbinger and Jordan Lang. Who is vetting UNIT's staff? In the first episode of this series, we see a scientist giving DNA research to the forces behind Severance, which no doubt was the final thing they needed to complete their biological weapon to wipe out most of Homo Aqua. Regardless of his motivations to secure safe citizenship for himself and his mother, you would think that UNIT would have tried harder to keep such sensitive research in the hands of people less likely to be that easily corrupted. And the same goes for Ted Campbell, the agent of the Institute of Las Clement, who infiltrated the human delegation group for Underwater. This man, whose sad terminal illness and therefore vulnerability to coercion by such an institute was fully recorded, and he still made it into a sensitive mission with a sonic weapon, which somehow made it through security checks, and this led to the deaths of the entire human delegation: Ravi Singh, Austin Pierce, and Min So, all dead because of him. So much death and destruction because of UNIT's inability to properly vet people. It really, really vexes me. And that brings us onto the Institute of Las Clement. Personally, I think they were an unnecessary story element. They weren't really fully explained, they didn't really add anything to the story, and the death of Colonel Ibrahim and the human delegates of the underwater agents at their hand aside, I did feel like there were maybe too many warring factions on the human side of this series. You had UNIT, the heads of state of all Earth nations, the group spearheading Severance, and then on top of that you had Las Clement. Suffice to say, it got quite crowded quite quickly. Another problem I had was the sheer volume of death on both sides, more notably for Homo Aqua. Not only did the aforementioned lovable human characters die, but 90% of Homo Aqua also died, proving if nothing else that humanity really hasn't learned anything from its past encounters with Homo Reptilia or Homo Aqua over the past couple of centuries. And this is also especially frustrating when you consider that in the timeline of the Hooniverse, this is only 5 years after the 11th Doctor, Amy and Rory, encountered Homo Reptilia in Wales in the year of 2020. You'd think UNIT might be just a little bit more prepared for an encounter with members of this ancient civilization. And that finally brings me to the ending. Don't get me wrong, I don't see any version of humanity's near future in the Hooniverse where they coexist with Homo Reptilia or Homo Aqua. On one hand, this series does just prove what the episode Cold Blood proved back in 2010. That neither humanity or their ancient predecessors are ready to negotiate. Neither side is willing to cede what they believe is rightfully theirs, and both sides are all too ready to resort to drastic measures in order to maintain their monopoly of the Earth. That said, while it's certainly a more realistic ending, it's not the nicest one. You'd think that if this series was supposed to show how humanity has learnt since their encounter with the 456, that this would have been much better in terms of interspecies diplomacy. This, however, was not the case, and it was honestly quite a disappointment. Now, I had originally intended to review each episode individually, but this series can, in my opinion, be summed up in 3 sentences. Man is in the wrong place at the right time, man falls in love with a fish woman, the rest of their respective species are at each other's throats until humanity ultimately proves that they've learnt absolutely nothing, even after numerous previous encounters. This series was full of very poignant political, environmental, and social themes that took inspiration from both modern and historical examples of human arrogance, hubris, and failing, and it does that incredibly well. In these aspects, the series definitely cements itself as a memorable story. In terms of storytelling in the context of the Hooniverse, however, it further emphasises why humanity needs the Doctor. Because without him, they just resort to violence and cruelty disguised as diplomacy. That is quite a tough pill to swallow as the audience. And that brings us to the end of this review. What did you guys think of the war between the land and sea? Do you agree with our review? Did you notice something that maybe we missed? Let us know in the comments section of your favourite streaming app.
Or in the comments section for our social media posts for this episode on Instagram and TikTok at Tardessian Files Podcasts. We also have a Blue Sky account now under the handle at tardessianfiles.bsky.social, where we will not only be posting about new episodes, but we'll also be using it to engage with our lovely viewers to hear more of your ideas and feedback. Please leave a like and subscribe, and as always, see you next time on Tardessian Files.